It's always a pleasure to hook up with Paul Shamplina, founder of Landlord Action. And Paul is joining me on this Zoom call because obviously in the last couple of weeks, we've had the ending of the eviction ban. And Paul, I think a good place to start is, how do you see the private rented sector at the moment? Do you think that it's going to return to normal quite quickly, or is it ever going to return to normal and things have been changed irrevocably by COVID?
Right, God, big question early doors, isn't it? Vanessa, you get stuck right in there, don't you? Don't mess about. So, look, where are we at the moment? Look, I mean, from speaking to letting agents out there and obviously sales agents, there's a lack of stock. So, you know, the demand is still really strong. We know central London prices have come down, rents have come down a bit in London, but the demand is strong for rented property. The bigger question is landlords and how landlords are feeling at the moment, and obviously the stamp duty concessions coming to an end because obviously everything is really, really expensive. But I mean, of course, where we're at the moment, I mean, you know, look, the courts were on hold, as you know, for 6 months. We're just coming out of COVID, or touch wood, we're coming out of COVID and the lockdown and everything that's happened. Yeah, I think that the market is really, really buoyant. It's really, really buoyant. I think in the next 2 years and the white paper coming that's going to be produced, and the consultations with the government relating to the Renters Reform Bill is going to be a different story with regard to how the change is going to be, which obviously cover, for me, one of the biggest changes happening in the private rental sector, which obviously is the abolishment of Section 21, up there with obviously Section 24, and obviously the abolishment of mortgage interest relief, and direct payment to landlords of universal credit or housing benefit, which happened in 2008. It is on par with all that. And of course, everything else that comes with it in the Renters Reform Bill. We talk about lifetime deposits, changes of assured short-hold tenancies, landlord redress, landlord licensing. We need court reform. We need to make sure we strengthen the grounds of Section 8. So, yeah, I mean, that's where we're at. But, I mean, demand is really strong. Landlords, you know, I'm seeing a lot of older landlords that are thinking about, and we have seen a lot of landlords that have made contact with us at Landlord Action that want vacant possession because they want to sell their property because obviously the capital growth that they've got. So they want vacant possession. And I know some big investors that are waiting to get back in to look at product and to build, you know, and we talk about build to rent, which is still very tiny. But I think, you know, 2022 will be a better indicator. We don't know how the economy is going to go, obviously after the support, but there's not going to be any type of crash. That's not going to happen. You know, there may be a little bit of a correction in the market. So it's still really buoyant.
Indeed. Now, you were predicting a tsunami of landlords coming through to start seeking possession. You know, as of the 1st of June, when the eviction ban lifted, did your landlord helpline ring off the hook, or has it been a bit of a slow burner or even a damp squib?
The answer is no. So the last 3 months we've taken on 3 new solicitors. We've got a new head of legal, a guy called Paul Sauerbutz, who's 22 years qualified solicitor. I mean, Landlord Action has been known as the eviction company, and we're transforming it now into the housing law specialists. I mean, we've got a team of 17 staff at Landlord Action now, grown dramatically. You know, the last 6 months we've been really, really busy. We've had landlords holding out the last month because they're waiting for the notice periods to change after the 1st of June. So we've gone 6 months, 4 months, 1st of August, 2 months, going down, you know, going back down. And then, of course, we're going to go back to normal 1st of October. Section 8's 14 days, Section 21's 2 months. So we've been really, really busy. I mean, I've literally, and obviously, you know, I've done a lot of work with the NRLA and government and engaging with evictions and stats, and we started the mediation business for the POS and so forth. We're really, really busy. I've got a new instruction team. I've got an exemption team that we're dealing with exemptions because obviously the bailiff ban. I have got a review hearing team. Okay. We've literally built up different teams. So, and the landlords that we act for literally, and we still do the fixed fee service, is, the landlords, we know that 85% of landlords out there have 5 properties or less. But, the smaller landlords, they've been the ones that have been affected worse. And rent arrears have been at an all-time high. And, you talk about the eviction ban, restarting on the 1st of June. I did have my busiest press day. I did 10 interviews in one day once. I did 8 or 7 or 8 on my birthday on the 31st of May. And because obviously it's a big deal. Obviously the court's opening up. We know there's backlogs of about 11,000 evictions to be listed down at the county court level, we believe. There's 294 bailiffs, 170 courts. There's a massive there's a problem with bailiffs, recruiting bailiffs, because no one wants to be a bailiff. You need to use High Court enforcement officers. We've got a massive spike of High Court enforcement instructions we're doing. On the 1st of June, when you could reapply, our High Court enforcement team that we use, the company, they were sending all the letters out because you've got to give 14 days notice. And actually, on Wednesday next week, I don't know when this comes out, but Wednesday next week, I'm actually recording live on the Vanessa Feltz BBC Radio London a live eviction that's taking place. There's one landlord, he's been made homeless. He's owed best part of £30,000 rent arrears, had no rent for 2 years. Horrendous stories, properties being trashed. And a lot of those landlords pre-COVID have been the worst affected. I mean, we've heard some terrible stories, and, everything that's all gone on because of this pandemic, you will see landlords exit the marketplace, but of course you'll see landlords that will buy more stock, but obviously trying to find stock, trying to find the deals is going to be the hardest thing to come by.
Yeah, indeed. You mentioned that you'd had a kind of influx of landlords serving notice to gain repossession for vacant possession in order to sell, and no doubt, benefit from this incredibly hot market that we're currently experiencing. Have you seen any other kind of mini trends of why landlords are seeking possession? I mean, one of the things I wondered was more antisocial behaviour issues, because clearly during lockdown, many people struggled with their mental health. They were cooped up inside all the time. Are you seeing any kind of mini trends like that?
You took the words out of my mouth. I was just going to say antisocial behaviour. So we saw a massive increase in antisocial behaviour because firstly, there was no notice period, rather than serving a 6-month notice. Secondly, you're 100% right. A lot in housing, in HMOs. I mean, that's why when Section 21 goes, a lot of landlords use Section 21 because of antisocial behaviour. The big issue is obviously gaining evidence. A lot of tenants and a lot of co-tenants, you'll know from HMOs, are too scared and too intimidated to get. I mean, we've heard some horrendous stories of antisocial behaviour. I can tell you even now, from speaking to police, from my contacts, there's been a huge rise in antisocial behaviour calls relating to rented property and landlords taking action in their own hands to do unlawful evictions. That's happened, increased. I've had police call me because I know people, and they've had advice when they're actually on a call, believe it or not. So that's happened. So we saw a big rise in antisocial behaviour. What will happen, the bigger picture, and I predict this, and again, I've been doing this for 30 years and seen a massive change. When Section 21 goes, which could be 2.5 years, when eventually we know it's going to go, and there's obviously going to be these reforms under the Renters Reform Bill. What will happen when there is the deadline for that notice to go? And people say about, look at Scotland. Scotland's a tiny market compared to England, and most of it is social housing possession cases. Basically, you'll see a lot of landlords serving Section 21s before that deadline date. We'll see a massive spike in that. And actually, the amount of landlords that are serving notices and agents and issuing claims incorrectly is really, really high. I mean, I would say to anyone out there, use a regulated firm of solicitors. Don't use an unregulated eviction company. I put my hands to that, because it's more difficult now than ever before to issue a claim at court, and the delays because of the backlog in the courts. That's why they brought review hearings in, just to slow it up, and they haven't worked. And a review hearing, basically, Vanessa, was a procedure where they wanted to know whether cases were priority, and they do a 5-minute call to the landlord and the tenant. And we can tell you now, we've got someone that works full time to do the review hearings. Most of the time, the courts don't even call you up. And they're supposed to set down substantive main hearings within 21 days. That hasn't helped. They're trying to spread the hearings out because they don't want too many people at the courts. So it was just a bit of a delaying tactic. And I can tell you now that I heard a judge speak on a webinar about a month ago, and he more or less said it's been a waste of time. It hasn't worked, you know. So and I know the NRLA, and they've been involved in a report which is coming out called The Weight of Justice 2021, How COVID Legislation Affected Possession. We gave some information on that, and they're calling for the review hearings to be scrapped as well. It's just another expense and another delay in the system.
Okay, that's interesting. Have physical court hearings started again now, Paul, or is it still a combination of online and physical, or how's it working?
No, I mean there's loads. We do dozens of hearings a month, so we have advocates that do the hearings all over the country. The landlord turns up, or the letting agent turns up, meets the advocate, and they have the 5-minute hearing. Most of the time, the tenants aren't turning up to court, or they get advice from duty solicitors. There has been remote hearings. Don't forget, before all of COVID, I was on this consultation, we were talking about housing courts. That's all been kicked into the long grass. We're talking about specialist housing courts that deal with them, which in principle makes sense, but you have to have the expertise, you have to have the judges, you have to have the bailiffs. The biggest issue is the bailiffs backlog, I think, in my opinion, to be able to deal with the backlog. I mean, you only got, I know this from experience from doing my TV program. Oh, by the way, I got an exclusive for you. So my program's coming out on the 24th of June at 10 p.m. Just found out yesterday. But when I do turn up on the evictions and I meet these bailiffs, they might do 10, 12, 14 evictions a day. And they were doing them by themselves. They have to go in pairs now. And don't forget, one thing that people have forgotten about, during 2020, no social housing possession cases were issued, more or less. There was no case, because they all held back. So we're talking about councils, we're talking about housing associations. So that's why my prediction is in 2021, I think there'll be at least 150,000 possession claims that will be issued in the courts.
Wow.
The 2000 and the 2019 levels were about 110,000, of which 70% of those are housing, are social housing. So, people, you look at the figures for 2021, it was minimal because people weren't going to court, and there was no social possession cases.
No, very interesting. I did just want to concur with you about seeking legal advice and professional advice for creating the paperwork, because the government have issued new guidelines, and I did go and look at it myself, and I thought, crikey, this is quite complicated. And as you say, Paul, you only have to get something wrong, like spelling the tenant's name wrong, and it can get kicked out and you're right back to square one. So actually, it's a false economy not to actually, work with somebody, companies such as Landlord Action, who do this day in, day out, because it could actually take longer if you try and do it yourself. So, I will echo those points. I mean, look, you've got a property, right? There's been bigger delays than ever before because of COVID, courts, bans, this, that, whatever. Rent arrears are stacking up. So then we can obviously have a conversation shortly about rent arrears and collecting debt and all that. But you get something wrong, the forms constantly change. People go on the internet, and I started the fixed fee eviction industry 20 years ago with my former business partner. It changed. So much more difficult to issue claims now. And we've got 10 solicitors and paralegals that just do the legal work. I mean, the professional indemnity insurance, we pay something like almost £20,000 a year. You go to someone that tries to do it, or an agent or an unregulated eviction company, they mess it up. And we've taken cases on from people that have messed it up, gets dismissed. Then at the time when you had to serve 6-month notice periods, another 6 months to go to court, all that lost rent, and there's no redress. There's no, because some people aren't, they're not insured to actually issue court proceedings. So the laws are in court is you've got to be a solicitor's, or you've got to be the landlord to issue the claim yourself effectively. Yes, you can have a layman that can try and maybe do the advocacy for you if you get right of audience. But you're right. I mean, how much for the difference of paying £400, £500, £600 or whatever to do with a case, having a professional solicitor to do it for you that's specialised in landlord tenant,
And it's like it is the old saying, and we've come across this all the time. You can say this about property maintenance, or buying a boiler or whatever. Cheap is always expensive, and you're trying to get vacant possession. So it's really important, and do the diligence on that company as well. Just like any supplier you use, a bit same with a letting agent.
Well, I've used the services of Landlord Action myself, and one of the most valuable things I found about it was having the advocate there to guide me through everything. But also, I wouldn't say I'd fallen out with my tenant, because I hadn't had any real direct contact with her, because I have fully managed service. But I felt quite awkward or nervous of meeting the tenant. She was going through a divorce. She'd fallen out with her husband. He was there with his new girlfriend, which actually caused quite ruction.
Can I ask you, was she better looking or not?
And it was all quite, it felt a little bit uncomfortable. I was really glad that the advocate was there as almost like a buffer between us. And actually, I did end up talking to the tenant, and we were very civil to each other. And
it was a circumstance change, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was very, very awkward for her, and I actually felt tremendous empathy for her, that she was,
which is most landlords
left
do.
with the 4 kids, while this her husband had gone off with this other woman, and they both turned up for the hearing. So it was I actually kind of almost sided with her in the end, strangely.
But the key was, and we called Landlord Action for a reason, is you had to get your property back.
Yeah, and I did.
Key. And that's the key. That's the key, because avoids hurt a landlord, property maintenance charges, tax regulation, but rent arrears and gaining possession is paramount.
Yes, it is. And I think, as we both agree, the risks have been amplified since COVID in terms of, getting the paperwork right, etc. And it's just like you say, cheap is often expensive in property. So best to get it right first time. We mentioned rent arrears. What is the biggest rent arrears you have come across since the pandemic and lockdown started?
Great question. I had one landlord, but it also include damage. She was owed £80,000. So she was, but it wasn't just rent arrears. She's now making a case against the letting agent. We've given her some advice about that, because there was no referencing done. We featured that I was on BBC London with her. She came on the TV. We've written a few stories about her. When I'm engaging with the staff, we've got a debt recovery department, Vanessa, and we do fixed fees. What's going to happen now is, most of the time, and you'll know this from being a seasoned landlords just write off the rent arrears, because they've got to track the tenant down, and cost of trying to get a money judgment, and you end up getting £1 a month. Basically, we're going to get landlords now where we can do debt recovery from as little as £500 or whatever. But as soon as an eviction date is set down and the tenant's still in the property, we're trying to do enforcement of a money order, which becomes a county court judgment. Very important, right? Because we're getting a lot of landlords that owe a lot more money this time round in COVID rather than previous, and that money judgment will last for 6 months. But I would say, if you are owed money, or a tenant absconded, or trash property, whatever, we have a trace service. We do a debt recovery service. So just go on the website, landlordaction.co.uk. It is the hardest thing to do, and this is coming from an ex-bailiff, to try and collect money from a tenant or an ex-tenant, because most tenants that are renting don't have any assets, Vanessa. If they've got a job, the good thing about you've got social media now, so it gives you a bit more intel into the individual. Or if you're on LinkedIn, where they're working, you get an attachment of earnings, and then, X amount is made, because of course a lot of tenants will aspire to try hopefully to buy their own property. I think what will be good, I hope so, and we've had some discussions at government level, various different working groups, is that rent payments will be linked to credit scoring, credit ratings, a bit like when you pay your mortgage or your Barclay card or whatever, and it helps a tenant to get better credit ratings. So that will be a good start, because of course, better than anyone. And I think if Section 21 goes, Vanessa, the abolishment, I think landlords will be much more stringent with referencing, they get more guarantors and so forth. But if you don't enforce the money order against a tenant and they lie in their application form, they don't ask for a previous landlord's reference, and they lie, which happens quite a lot, and that money order doesn't show up, that's why you should get 3 months bank statements, then they end up going to another landlord and maybe doing the same thing. I'm not saying all landlords are doing that, and I get that, but it does happen with some tenants.
Indeed. Yeah, we hear about that a lot on Property Tribes. And actually, I was just going to say, this is one of the great benefits of using tenant referencing with an open banking aspect to it, because
Definitely.
then you do get that immediate snapshot of and there's no kind of delay or anything. So just as we kind of wind this up, Paul, you have another bit of news for us. You're a big advocate of landlord education, and you've actually got your own little course starting up soon, haven't you? And I think you've picked a really great topic. So can you tell us a little bit about that as we close this out?
Yes, of course I can. As you know, I try. I mean, this week alone, I've done 4 or 5 webinars, whatever. I did a course. I got asked to do something about 7, 8 years ago, and I never got around to doing it. Really, I kept putting it off, putting it on. And then obviously with COVID, so I've done a course called Self-Manage or Not to Self-Manage. Landlords Put a Price on Your Time. And it's an hour-and-a-half course. I'm going to sell it online. We're going to launch it next 2-3 weeks. I've got a website which will go live called paulshamplina.tv. And, it'd be £39, £49. It'll be quite cheap. And basically, I'm debating with a letting agent and 2 professional landlords. And we're talking about stuff. And actually, the whole point of someone watching the course is a snapshot to think, you know what, depending on my landlord journey, I'm a landlord. I've got 3 properties. I'm working full time. I don't have time to manage. There is a false economy of thinking, actually, do I pay an agent, a let fee rather than the full management fee? And actually, what's the difference between the bit in between? You work that out on a monthly, and actually, bearing in mind everything that's gone on with COVID, actually, I should put a price on my time. And do I want to, take a call from the tenant because they've lost their keys because they're drunk at 5 a.m, or the boiler's broken? Do I actually want to do that? Because property management now, and you'll echo this from being a seasoned landlord and having a portfolio, property management and legislation and compliance and everything that goes with it, and relationships with tenants as well can be challenging, is the hardest thing to do. So I've done something which is a real practical course. It's not about selling property and property investment. It's about, you can do property investment and you can do buy to let, and there's some good educational course out there. But if you don't get the property management right, and you don't get the right tenant, and how you get the right tenant and how you collect your rent, your property portfolio is not going to pay.
I could not agree more with you, Paul. And I think you're absolutely right. Landlords do not place enough emphasis on valuing their time. And, they're very often, understandably, looking to kind of cut corners and reduce costs, etc. But I think one false economy is not working with a letting agent, particularly 100%. if you're just starting out, because you
Definitely.
don't fully know the ropes. So
use
certainly,
a letting agent, full management on your first buy to let. I mean, there's some brilliant letting agents out there. And the old saying, I say this to you so many times, and we've done so many interviews, as a landlord, and you and Nick, you go travelling up and down the country, and you take your cats with you, right? The old saying, no news is good news, isn't it, Vanessa?
Yeah, that's true. And I think also, if you're remote from your properties as well, I think it's very important to have a local letting agent on the ground with local contacts who can visit the property easily, etc. Of course, there's certain circumstances where people can self-manage quite happily on their own, but certainly for newbies and remote landlords, I think fully managed is by far the less risky option. Obviously, some people have higher risk thresholds than others, but for me, I'm a low risk belts and braces landlord, and I like working with professional standards like ALA or Safe Agent. And we do indeed have a thread on Property Tribes about how to vet a lettings agent and find your way to a good one, because that's equally as important, isn't it, Paul?
Definitely. I mean, I represent we've got 2 well-known brands, or 3 well-known brands. We've got My Deposits, we've got the Property Redress Scheme, we've got 16,000 members, agent members. We've got Client Money Protect, which is client money protection. It is important. I would recommend people that see this is go on a thread. The most important thing for you as a landlord, okay, is having the right letting agent fully managing your property. That's the most important. I mean, yes, maintenance guys and everything else, but the letting agent is the key. And we talk about that in the course, and on how to make sure you pick the most decent letting agent.
Well, thank you very much for joining me, Paul. As always, it's great to catch up with you and hear your incredibly valuable insights into the private rented sector. You wear so many hats and you see so many different angles of everything, and you're right on the cutting edge with landlord action in terms of what's happening with landlord possessions, etc. So thank you for all that you do for the property community and all the webinars and all the educational resources that you create, because I know you share with us that landlord education is absolutely paramount and that risks have been amplified since COVID-19, and we all need to be doing everything we can to mitigate those risks.
Most definitely.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul. See you again soon.
Keep safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.